here with Annette for Ascension in the Raw, episode 10. Can't believe it. And Annette had a really great idea for a topic, and I'm getting really excited to go in on this with you all. So just want to invite you all to be present and just take a breather and slow down and keep your heart open, your mind open, and enjoy this topic and this journey with us. We're going to go all over. Why are there humans in my reality? If I'm on my ascension journey, why are there humans here with me? Like, what is the deal? And so I asked Annette to open for us because this was her brilliant topic, and I want to see how she starts it off. And then I'm really excited to weave. So thank you, Annette, for this great topic today.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to start today, and we're going to talk about why we have humans here. And we have this preconceived notion that when we get to certain places, everyone we meet is going to be ascended. Everyone we, have relationships with is going to be where we are, consciousness-wise. We just have this feeling that everyone's going to be like us. It's almost like when you're in high school or college and everything you're doing, everyone has really similar experiences. Everyone is kind of doing a lot of the same stuff, right? And when you get into Ascension, we kind of feel like we're going to just be with all these really like-minded people. And some of the journey might start off with like-minded people, but you find you very quickly start to veer off, right? From some people you met, some people you thought you go on your journey with, but all of a sudden they're gone. And then you're on your Ascension journey, but you're still kind of in the same place as you were. A lot of times your externals don't really start to shift until way past awakening and really deep into Ascension. And they don't shift the way we think they're going to shift. So we can start off in our journey. I always hate that word. Everyone's on a journey. It's like so many times. You're on a journey. We're all on a journey. When you start with awakening and Ascension, and we have this thing where we don't want to be alone, but then we want to be alone. And when we want to be alone, usually we're not allowed to be alone anymore. We have to be with people. And when we want to be with people, we have to be by ourselves, right? And you're going to go in and out of that journey. And when you get into the fourth dimension, which is to me still kind of awakening, beginning of Ascension, you were still kind of setting in that fourth dimensional space, that when you're in that part of the journey, there's a big consciousness shift from beginning of fourth dimension to the end of the fourth dimension, because there's a lot of time we spend there. So even if you meet someone and you're both still technically in the same dimension, they can be way more human than you are, because you might be at the end getting ready to go on to the fifth, even though we're always kind of bebopping between different ones. I don't want anyone to think that they're always in the fourth dimension, or I'm always in the sixth. You could be 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8. You're always going to be fluctuating. Your consciousness is going to be way higher than where your body's setting. It's always going to be way higher than where your body's setting. You're always going to be way, 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 way higher than where you think you are. Consciousness-wise, body-wise, it's always going to be a little bit different. We always think our body's higher than it is. So it's important to remember that there's a lot of places to play in the fourth dimension. There's a big shift. I kind of look at it like if you ever listen to music at the beginning of a decade and listen to where music was at the end of a decade. And it's totally different. If you listen to like the beginning of 1950 and then look at where music was in the 1960s. If you go to the 60s, go to 1970. Start at 1980 and look where we were at 1990, 1990, 2000. What was music changes so drastically in that 10-year period. And you can be in the fourth dimension for that long. You can be in the fourth dimension for decades and decades and decades. But the drastic difference of the people you meet in that dimension and how many people you meet that are still in their human consciousness. And I want to just preference that for a second. Human consciousness. It doesn't mean it's anything wrong with where these people are, but they're still operating from their human consciousness is the one that makes all their choices for them. That they are not operating from ascended aspects yet. But technically, when we're in the fourth dimension, we're not either, really. I mean, we're starting to look at them, but we're not embodying anything. We don't even start embodying until the sixth dimension. So as we start to go forward today, I kind of want to just set that tone as we talk about why are there so human people here? Why have I not transcended these aspects of me? Because these are still aspects of us. They're not something else. They're not just there to not show us something. Everyone is showing us something. There's still something about them that's in us, or they could not hold there. But we're going to have them. I'm going to kick it back to Marissa after I kind of say this one more thing. There's different reasons why they're going to be there. Some of the main reasons: you're always going to be the highest consciousness person in your reality, because that's why you're in the reality. You're there to activate other people. You're there to get activated by other people. You're there so they can kind of help you along, and you're there to help them along. You're there to show them what is a highest aspect it acts like. You're there to see, can I hold my consciousness around these people? Can I be around people in a human consciousness and still come from my highest when nobody else does? Can I carry a reality because I know it's highest line when I have no support? Because one thing about human consciousness is it will not support you. If you are getting supported in any shape or form by someone operating in a human consciousness, that is not the consciousness that is supporting you. Another aspect of them is technically supporting you. It's not coming from their human consciousness. It doesn't support anything. It only supports itself, because that's all it has the capacity to do. It doesn't have the capacity to bring everybody in. It only has the capacity to just be with itself and take care of itself. It doesn't have the bandwidth for anything else. So why are people here? Because we're still technically have a human aspect, even if it's not the one making the choices. Are they going to always be there? Or are we going to always be saddled with them? How do we react when we're there? So these are the things I'm going to throw out. I'm going to kick it back to you, Marissa, to go. And I have a knock on the door, so I'm going to go see which cat is pawing loudly at the door.
Oh, that's great, Annette. Thank you. Yeah, I love everything you shared. And one of the things I wanted to make sure that we touched on early in this discussion is, well, what is human consciousness? Like, what are we talking about? Like, this is a pretty funny title, why are there humans in my reality, right? And so I want to share some words that flowed through just to support everybody in breaking down, like, what are we talking about when we say this? So first of all, there's no judgment with anything. There's no hierarchy with anything. Nothing's better than or less than. These are just different levels of awareness and consciousness that have corresponding behaviors and functioning and access or not a lot of access and so on. And so when we're talking about the human consciousness or the human ego, one of the words that came through was, this is human basic model. So this is like the most primal, self-absorbed, very not aware of others. And these are some of the words that I came up with, because we're not talking about, oh, humans and being human. We're talking about a kind of consciousness of the unevolved human, basically, right? That's like in this scarcity and fear, and like the first initial aspect that could come into the human body here of self-awareness, right? Which really isn't very self-aware. So these are some of the words that I got just to assist everyone, because one of the things that's so important that we're having this discussion, I'm observing on social media, um, different kinds of teachers, whatever, speaking about this. And there's still this kind of diluted or diluted way of, oh no, we're going to say humans are evil or bad. And it's very puritanical, right? So then people are rebelling against that and fighting against and saying, well, I want to be human. What's wrong with being human? So I think it's important to clarify what we're talking about here is a kind of consciousness, unevolved from primal instinct. So it's existing at the most basic base model level when we're talking about human potential, right? And the development of cognition and metacognition and all of that. So it's all about human potential. So these are some keywords. This is a grid work of strife and suffering and compromise. So this is a completely different dimension of existence here. The human ego concept is selfish, it's destructive, it's negative, it's wasteful, entitled, it's self-absorbed or service to self only. there's a lack of self-love. So it's all about lack and scarcity and the fear, which makes the individual feel or perceive through the illusion of separation, right? So some of these words, lack of self-love. So we're going to go a lot of lacks here, right? In abundance consciousness, a lack of self-love, a lack of self-confidence, a lack of integrity, a lack of respect, a lack of patience, a lack of compassion, because it's the base model. It's not in these elevated concepts yet of being able to consider others and the self. So it's kind of like, another great way to say it is like narcissism. Like all of us in our toddler stages of development here are narcissists. Some people never grow out of that, right? So I just wanted to share that the human basic model, is very different from the divine human. I call it the divine human in my work, or the ascended human, that's self-aware and conscious and consistently in an effort of self-improvement, cares about others, altruism, like more of a communal element, an awareness of self and other versus it's just me, and nothing else here. Um, and so I just want to share some key code words about the divine human or the ascended human. This is meaning and awareness of multiple aspects of self. So we realize, oh wow, I do have a lower consciousness, or you could say the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, like just to try to get some imagery going here of these different levels of self, where like that's not my highest self, like that's part of me that's self-sabotage, right? Well, conversely then, the divine human, the full body, the whole unit, the whole body, energy body, is like a giant walking heart chakra that you perceive from. So you are reading and listening to the energy, you're perceiving instead of thinking. So the whole operating system is completely different. Um, Peaceful, calm, centered, content, connected, happy, at one, again, perceiving instead of thinking. So you're reading the energy and you're feeling to know instead of analyzing and looping or referencing past experiences, or not even willing to entertain possibilities, like basically just not willing to move beyond where you are. So I wanted to just put that out first and then give it back to you, Annette, if you like, before going into more pieces of this.
No, I always think it's funny when we describe things, because I feel like we always kind of come from different angles, when we talk about something. Because I would never describe uh, anything enlightened about human consciousness. I wouldn't even. And when you say it one way, I can see how you say it that way. I can understand when you say, you know, to me, all of human, there's no evolved human, right? It's all unconscious. Everything about your human aspect is unconscious. But I understand when you say it that way. I do see another side to it. You know that as we start to evolve, to me, our human evolves out. And our human is not the aspect we live from anymore. It's not making choices anymore. So, and that's one thing I really enjoy about when we talk, because we will say something and it's similar, but we each put a different way to say it, and I think it touches people in a different way. Because I will always say that when I say human conscious, there's nothing good about the human consciousness. I don't even like to even use the word good. It's just neutral. There's nothing there that's redeeming. You can have an aware human, but that doesn't mean they're a conscious human. They might be aware of others, and I think that's just through development. As we grow, we grow to, we get older. When you're a child, you touched on it. You don't give a shit about, you don't think about anybody else when you make a choice. You want what you want, and that's it. Now, we might get older, maybe in our 20s are still like that. We don't take anyone else into account when we make a choice, right? It's still all about us, and we just don't think about it, right? You maybe get in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s and your 60s, and you start saying, okay, well, I got to make a choice. There are other people here that are going to be affected by a choice I might make. So I think there can be more awareness to a human consciousness, but it's still not conscious enough to know what it's creating. And I think when you start talking about the divine human, I wouldn't put those words together. I understand why you do. I wouldn't put those words together because to me, there's nothing divine about it. It's our higher aspects, and then there's our human. And our human, to me, is, and if anyone ever watched the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and they had a whole thing one season about fear was a demon, right? And when it finally appeared, it was like this teeny. She literally stepped on it because she was like, wow, I can't believe it. I'm so scared of you. And she just stepped on it and it was over. And to me, that's our human consciousness is kind of like that. And I think when we get to certain parts of our awakening, we don't want to let our human parts go because we feel like it makes us who we are. And in a way, it does make us who we are because it made us who we are to that point. You know, that's how we got shaped. That's how we make decisions we make. That's why we make decisions we make. And then we get to part of our ascension process and we start, and that to me, we're just embodying in other aspects, not our human aspects. So our human aspect's still there. It just doesn't make active choices. We don't live from that aspect. That's not saying we might not have, if we're in different situations, we might go unconscious and our human takes over and we start going from that human again. Because we will. And it takes a long time to be able to be so conscious, not just aware, but conscious of ourselves to stop doing that. And we have this thing and feel like we'll eventually get to the point where we can shift everyone around us to always be at their highest, or we can shift. And it's not saying that we can't shift people out, you know, but they got to want to go too. And if it's not their time to go, they're not going to go. It doesn't matter how much you're trying to pull them uphill. You know, I always picture like coming on with a rowboat and trying to get people in the rowboat, and they'd rather just drown in the water. You know, they don't want to come with you. It's not their time yet. You know, it's not good. It's not bad. It's not their time yet. And the people who it is their time, you know, they're not the ones you thought would be with you. You know, they're not the ones that are there. And when we get stuck with humans, we're like, why are we here? You know, what is my role here? What am I supposed to do? Why do I have to be the highest consciousness? Can I hold that consciousness? I think that's a big reason why we end up where we end up. Can I hold it? You know, can I be there? Can I be the highest consciousness here? You know, can I see when people are a different aspect? And that can take a long time to be able to do that. And that's why one of the reasons, and I'm going to kick it back to you. And I do want you to explore the, how you see the divine human, because I think that's interesting. If you can go a little bit more on that, because like I said, I usually don't get into too much of that. So if you could go into that, I would appreciate that. If anyone watches, there's two shows that I have watched. One is The Last of Us. The other one is You, right? I don't know if you've watched either one of those shows. But on both these shows, they have very questionable lead characters. And the writers got really confused, especially on the show You, got kind of confused when all of a sudden people really liked their lead character, who was, you know, painted as basically a serial killer. And they're like, why are people liking this character? You're not supposed to root for this character, but the way the writing was done in the beginning of the series is you found yourself just like rooting for him to get out of the situation so he would get himself in. You're like, why am I rooting for him? I'm not supposed to, you know, because it was a grayness to the character, or there was dimensions to the character where he wasn't all one thing. It wasn't all, yeah, he did pretty deplorable things, but as humans, we have a scale of what's deplorable, right? We have the human scale of, well, okay, this is really not good, you know, like you should go to jail for that. And then, well, maybe we're just not really nice to people. You know, we have these moral, whereas our soul doesn't see a lot of difference in it, honestly. You know, it's all one, it's conscious or it's not, you know what I mean? There's no gray there. But eventually they start to shift the writing in a lot of these shows that people will start to notice that they start making it so clear and start making the character even say how awful they are. Because they really want you to understand that this is not someone you're supposed to root for, right? These are not redeemable people. You're not supposed to want these people to survive. You know, you don't want to be sad when they're gone. You know, you want to be like, okay, well, that's fine. So I kind of feel in a way that, you know, our human can get painted like that. And I think in a way, from after what you said, that's probably how I painted it. You know, that it was, because you were definitely easier on the human consciousness than I was in my opening. You know, you were definitely gentler with it. And I think I can kind of see that sometimes we can get into this this thing where we only see that it's not our highest aspects, and we don't see that there are a lot of shades to it. There are a lot of shifts to it. And I probably don't focus enough on those. Like, you could be with someone in a human consciousness that maybe they're not spending as much time there. Maybe they go back to that when things get really rough, but there's other times when maybe they're not there. You know, they're in a different part. They're in a more aware state, a more, like I said, I would never say the human is evolved, but I can see how you say that, and I can understand your point on that. Like, yeah, it is evolving, right? And it's evolving. Maybe it's still just evolving in a human consciousness, but it's still evolving, and it is shifting. So I'm going to kick it back to you, and I'm going to make a couple notes on. Okay.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that my philosophy of how I see all of this, it's influenced by several things. It's influenced by perceptions coming in, being here on the planet, what humanity really is at its highest level. And so looking at it at different levels of consciousness, that it's not just one block. That, like I say, there's a base model, which is really lacking in self-awareness. And there's also influence in like my philosophical studies or theological studies, like with the Far East, that there are levels of consciousness. There's the witness consciousness, there's the ego consciousness, all this, right? I'm not really a huge fan of psychiatry or psychology, because I feel like they've taken a lot of these codes that were very pure and then purposely like distorted them to really mind fuck people through these practices, like shrinking their brains. So I won't get into that. But so basically where I'm coming from is not Western. It's Eastern and galactic. And the first thing is the word human. The word human. I love breaking apart words and looking at the light codes in the words. So there's hue, which is rays of light, which could be many different colors. But there's a ray of light that's the consciousness manifested, mono, hand in form. So it's light that has hands. So it's a model, and there are many upgraded versions of the model depending on the soul inside and the embodiment of the soul in the vessel itself. So, yeah, for me, I say there's a huge difference. There's an unconscious humanity, and then there's an evolved divine, humanity, conscious or unconscious. So I love getting to play with these concepts and like elaborate. Like, how I see is that we are all divine, and then we forget, or we're undergoing certain, on purpose, disconnections in order to learn and to perhaps even share more information from this, looking at this like a huge social experiment, like a zoological galactic experiment, and even sharing this information across the entire galaxy, perhaps with other life forms that are observing this whole time space continuum and what it does, to consciousness, and how it can be challenging to break through and then not, and all of this. So that's my how I've always felt about humanity, is I feel like it's very interesting. There are different philosophies that's inherently evil. It gets into philosophy and like Cartesian dualism, to be or not to be, or I think therefore I am, but then there's different levels of that. Who the fuck do I think I am, and is it megalomaniac, or it's so fascinating, and we can look at like human historical figures for that too. So for me, the unconscious human doesn't have any other aspects really activated yet, and it's fearful and can be, acting out of lack, and all the stuff that comes with that, from just being unconscious all the way to being super conscious. Because the thing is, like, we don't change bodies here. We're always going to have five fingers and five toes, and the hands. There's something really special that I receive about the hands, and there's a lot of creation myths too about like how we were created from stardust, and like, the divine dragon cosmic breath blew into us and animated us out of mud. So anyway, I'm looking at like a lot of myths, and also interesting galactic concepts that I came in with, and then looking at so many belief systems too. Yeah, so that's my share on that, and I'd be happy to pass it back to you. And then I have some fun things of like, well, more like on the why, like why why are we still with humans after we're no longer really functioning or identifying? Like, I don't consider myself human anymore, you know. Um, so, anyways, I'll pass it back to you, and then we'll keep going with the galactic zoological experiment.
Yeah, I think I don't really consider myself human. Some people say they think they're a hybrid. Um, I still don't consider the human conscious, though. I don't see a consciousness in human. I think it's a human consciousness, but it's not aware enough to be considered. Humans can make a conscious decision from an unconscious place. And but there's no evolve. I can see how some people would say there's involvement in humans, because we go from, you have people who, I don't even know how I want to put this. You have people that can do things and it's very judged very harshly for as a human, right? But then we get to our ascended aspects and we look at that differently. We understand there are soul contracts involved. We understand that that person agreed to have that done to them, right? We understand that, there's a reason the violence in the world, because we don't have that. People don't get angry. People don't move forward. People don't clear things. People have to be outraged, so when we look at a lot of things that humans will do. And when you start looking at them in a different space, you do see, as you said, that there's a reason they're acting the way they're acting. They just don't know the reason why. They can have some awareness, but they don't have the consciousness to know why they're doing it. And there's really no victim. There's no good, there's no bad, there's no positive, there's no negative. They're just doing what they're doing because they don't know what they're creating when they're doing it. And that's one thing you start to realize as you go through the awakening, as you go through the judgment of what we did as humans. And I don't think any of us here would sit there and say that we were the worst the worst humans ever. Most of us probably, we weren't in jail. We didn't, we didn't do some what we would look at as an awful thing, right? But it's just being in that human, operating from that human consciousness and letting that make choices for us. We see everything we created, and it's a lot to clear that. And then we start. You mentioned the galactics, and now we're clearing over multidimensional of selves in multidimensional ways. And we're not just clearing this reality; we're clearing all our realities, and that gets heavy, and that gets a lot. And then we don't feel so great about ourselves. Because even if we could have said as humans, oh, I guess I'm not so bad. When we look at ourselves, and to me, there is a difference between human and humanity. There to me is a striking difference there about, is, the best part of humans is their higher aspects, is our higher aspects humanity. And we can be in a human body. Does it still make us human? Our human consciousness is housed in our body, but is our body even really human anymore? It does become a hybrid. It does become something else. I mean, I don't get too much into the physical body stuff because I just never felt like it was stuff for me to share. I don't really share much about it. A couple things I've gone through, but there's other people who share that stuff, so I tend to stay away from it. But when we really look at what happens in the sense of how do we start looking at a human consciousness? How do we start looking at someone in that consciousness? Do we stay away from them at first? And do we stay away from them because we're afraid it'll bring it back out in us? That if we're around humans, it'll bring it back out in me. They're here in my reality, meaning I still have something in me that's pulling them there. They can't hold if I don't still hold something in there. That's a match to them. And I've had people in my life, and I remember thinking, "How are you still here? Like you're terrible, but you're still here, which means there's something linking us, and I don't know what it is. And sometimes we can spend years trying to figure that out, and we think we're trying to figure it out. Really, we're clearing the parts of us that are attaching us to these people because they're still a mirror to us. There's still an aspect to us. So a lot of times we're still with humans for a very long time. One, because I hear people say all the time they're more ascended people on the planet. And I would agree to that to an extent, but there's still billions of people who are not, right? So odds are you're probably going to be in a reality where you might be the most conscious person there. And if you're trying to hold a higher aspect, you're going to be around a lot of human consciousness, whether you're living with people. To me, when you go through points where you don't live with anybody, then you're living with people to see, can I hold it? Can I hold it? Can I show a different example? And you also study the human consciousness and really see how divided it is and how corrupted it is, in a sense, because it has gotten so muddled and it has gotten so complicated. I'm sure a lot of people wanting to listen to this and hear there's a way to get rid of it. We can get rid of the human people, and then we can't get rid of them because we're still have part of that human consciousness there. And if we always want to get rid of them, that's not really what our highest aspect would do. So it really can get kind of muddled because you can have humans in your life, and for one reason or the other, whether it's your children, it's your partner, it's your parents, it could be a zillion reasons why. Or you're working and you're still working in an environment where there's a lot of human consciousness still there. Those things get really hard to do after a while because you see that how corrupt and bizarre it all is. Humans look at us and say we're bizarre. We look at them and say they're bizarre. We kind of go back and forth with that, and when we just see that a lot, and it gets tougher and tougher to coexist sometimes, and you can't really build anything. Can you coexist for a while? Yes, building a reality with someone operating from human consciousness, and I think that's a distinction I would draw. Everyone's going to have a human consciousness, but is that what's making the choices? What aspect is making the choices? That's the one you want to talk to, and if it's the human consciousness, you can't build anything with that. You cannot build a reality with someone in a human consciousness. It won't last. So I'm going to kick that back to you, Marissa, and you can deconstruct that your way. How do you even do that? I don't know. Maybe you can. Tell me how you do it.
Thank you. That's great. I love it. So the first thing that came through when I was thinking about this topic today, and just receiving like, oh yeah, we could talk about this. This is something. So observing and learning from behavior like a galactic visitor would. So one of my first teachers on the journey of like metaphysics and quantum mechanics and psychic development, she would say to us, you spot it, you got it. And I remember just hating that so much for a long time, but it was showing me judgment, it was showing me all these pieces that I needed to see, of course. And then over time, we're in our ascension journey and we're thrown back in with other humans again. And it's to see a lot of how we used to be, um, to learn and to see, how we affected others at that time, and just really looking at like the matrix of the behavior and where it's coming from and what it is creating or not creating. So I like to look at this like, okay, we're at the zoo. It's a zoologist, a galactic soul level zoologist, just enjoying all the species and all the life forms here on Gaia, which I believe is true for us. We love the plants, the flora and the fauna, the animals, and then humans are another form of that. And then we used to be there, so it's easier to see. So I feel like there's a wonderful aspect of learning, and also developing ways to support the evolution or the expansion of self awareness for those who are, feeling that. But the big one, I love what you shared, was can we hold that? That's the big is first, can we hold our awareness now, this new access that we have, expanded awareness while being around them and not get sucked into it. And there's a huge building of our light quotient during that. It takes years. It takes years to not be triggered anymore, or to the point where you feel a dip in your frequency when you're around, and you will have to replenish yourself, do things that delight you, and refuel your light body. But it's pretty amazing because you start to observe some really stark differences in functioning and behaviors and intention, belief systems and stuff. A lot of them so old and like recycled. They're just the chain going down, down the DNA spiral into different generations. um so what I like to say is, we're not judging, but we're observing and we're learning, and it's showing us more about any unconscious parts in ourselves. And that's another beautiful reason why we're there, is we're learning from one another. So we're learning from them. Ideally, if we're lucky enough, if it's aligned, they're learning from us somehow, that they appreciate us, and sometimes not at all. So you can't have any expectations of reciprocating. And I think that's part of the unconscious human for sure, is that you can't expect to be supported by them. You can't expect to be respected, invested in by them, any of that, because they don't have the bandwidth. So I love that you said bandwidth, because to me it's a very neutral way of describing this. It's just, again, it's just awareness, But I love to say this, like being curious, learning, being interested in exploring, remembering our time there as well, and integrating that, forgiving ourselves as well for unconsciousness, unconscious behaviors back in the day, if you will. And a great visual of this I remember was so palpable was one of the newer Wonder Woman movies, where Gal Gadot is walking through a shopping mall, and we know she's a galactic, she's from another dimension, she's here, pretending to be human. And that's something we talk about a lot now. It's like, well, I'm pretending to be, but not really. But you're you're in this, in this body and this everything, but you're out there in the world to assist and be a light leader however you are supposed to. And she's strolling through the mall, and it's kind of like this moment, it's like a montage moment of this observing. She's just watching, and there's no judgment. She's just observing how people are like on autopilot, how the humans are on autopilot, and like shoveling food in, or fighting, or arguing, or being overly materialistic. It's really an interesting, just a mini little satire. Just boom, here's 3D consciousness right here. It was amazing. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's so us. Like we're here to observe. We used to be in that. We broke out of the amnesia. Thank goodness. How blessed are we to have gotten to this point? And how can we assist others? Yeah, really fascinating. So I'll pass it back to you.
I have to go back and I remember I watched the second movie, but I watched the first one more. I like the first one a little bit better than the second one. But I'll have to go back and watch that, because I think it's interesting when we talk about being around humans, and it will drain your field because you're holding the field. When you're the highest frequency in the room, you're holding the field, which makes you tired. So one thing I did notice is that you kind of go, a lot of our super awareness, superpowers, if you want to call them that, kind of go offline a lot of times when you're in a group of humans. If you're in a bar of human, a lot of people, because we're spending all of our energy to keep the field going, to support the field. So you might not have as much awareness. You might not feel as fully conscious as you would feel if you're by yourself, because your field can't spread out. And you won't get everything. It's like we talked a couple weeks ago. We talked about dreams, and we talked about you missing messages and going into your dream state and getting them. You might just be walking around your house, and when you're by yourself, you notice you're just getting all these stuff all the time. You know what's going on with everybody. Oh, the cat's at the door, and the cat's going to be at the door in about 5 minutes because the cat's coming down the hill, or I got to go do this, and oh yeah, I got to go downstairs and do that, and I got to go fix that, and the plant needs to be watered, because you can feel all that. And you go out and you're around a lot of people, and all of a sudden you don't feel all that anymore. The minute you started talking, I would start talking to someone, and they're like, okay, if you read minds, or what's my energy like, or they just want to download on themselves. But sometimes we kind of feel like we really don't even have a good gauge on it, because when we are out in public, a lot of times all of our energy can go to just supporting the field. And that can be very exhausting. So Marissa kind of touched on that when you are around a lot of people, and whether that's just people, when you go out, you see a lot of people. For a while, we don't want to. We get in this weird stage, and to me, it's kind of more in the fourth dimension, where you don't really want to be by yourself. You don't really want to be with people. You don't want to be either. It's both uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be in both places at one time. But I wrote a couple notes, because some things, when you hit on a couple things, I wanted to, it's funny because they are draining to our field. And anyone that is still human who we've known will still see you as your human aspect. And everything you do, they still will see you as that, because that's what they knew you as. So they still think you are. And when you're coming from different aspects, they don't understand that. And they don't know why you're different or why you're acting differently. They expect you to act the same way. And And I've done a lot of videos about, we shift ourselves, we can shift the field, and we can shift how people respond to us. Can they hold that forever? That depends on where they are in their journey. A lot of times, no, because it's not their home frequency anymore. Through Ascension, your home frequency shifts. It's no longer the frequency of the human frequency, which is in the 300s. You're at a different frequency. Your body becomes a different frequency. So you're always transmitting out a different frequency. That's why I can remember people would just run to get away from me when I would go out. People who knew anything about me would run to get away from me. They didn't want to sit next to me. They didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want anything to do with me. Because just being around people, we activate their field. We don't have to say anything. We don't have to talk to people. Human wants to talk, you talk. We don't have to. That just makes them feel better. Our fields do it all. We don't have to say anything. We don't have to do anything. And sometimes we bring out the worst in humans because all their stuff's clearing because we're a different frequency. If we're trying to bring up the frequency of the home, but they're living in the home, well, that's going to affect them, because that's not their home frequency. And it was funny because you touched on, can we hold it? And I thought I did a really good job. I could hold it. And, I have my moments when I would get triggered, and I try to take care of that by myself. And sometimes I do well at that. A couple of times I don't, But I remember during the election in the United States we just had, it got so polarized and so strong. I felt myself getting dragged into it. It got so ramped up. You know what I mean? Like, it got so ramped up that it triggered something deep within me where I could still feel like I was picking a side. And I remember I was really surprised at that because I was thinking I was past all that because I don't vote in anything. I don't get involved in the human world in that sense. I have distanced myself from that. I don't get involved in those matters. But I remember thinking to myself, as it got ramped up and ramped up and ramped up, I did find myself getting triggered by it, getting kind of sucked into it a little bit. But it had to get to that pitch level for me, where maybe 4 or 5 years prior, it didn't have to get to that pitch level. But now it did have to get that pitch level. So a lot of us, you might find yourselves when some things don't bother you, but maybe when some things get ramped up, it starts. And that's why you're in the situation where something gets ramped up to see. Now we have to dial it up to like a 12 to get you to be activated, to get you to get to that other part, to get to that deep part within you that you can clear that, because you didn't even know that was there. And until I felt that. And for a while, I tried to deny I was even feeling that. But then after a while, I was like, no, I'm definitely taking sides here. Like, I definitely want this to go a certain direction. And I had to be honest with myself about that. And so I've still got something there. It just had to get ramped up. So a lot of times you might be in a situation where it gets ramped up to such a pitch level that it does activate stuff. But a lot of us get upset about that because we think, oh, I went backwards. Oh, I failed. You just go deeper in. And it's something deeper in there you got to clear. There's just more of it there. We didn't get it all. So a lot of times we get faced with a lot of people in our human consciousness for that reason. And sometimes, I'll be honest, they're there because we don't want to let them go. And if we let them go, they might just go. And we don't like that. Our human consciousness doesn't like that. But there are situations where a lot of times we're holding humans here. We're trying to be overly compensating. We're trying to be, do everything we can for them so they don't want to go. We can say we don't want them there. But when there's no one else there, they're not so bad. Everything looks better when it's walking out the door, and so sometimes we might hold on to humans and people we know in their human consciousness because we're afraid there's no one coming after that. There's no one coming in to fill that space. And one thing I've realized about Ascension is it can take a long time for someone to come in to fill that space. Years, maybe decades, because a lot of times you don't feel the need for that. Sometimes there will be people that come in and out, but people who come in and stay like for really long, long periods of time, where in your human consciousness, it felt like that was maybe more common. That starts to go away because we shift so fast and they shift also. Okay, so I'm going to kick it back to you.
That's great. I always love your perspectives on all of it. It really helps us to keep expanding this and share it in such a big way. So thank you so much. I want to share some like key differences here, that this is a completely different brain. So, the unconscious human brain has constructs and rules and narratives and frequencies that are very shut down. So you think about some of the like stats, they'll say like, oh yeah, the general person uses like 2 to 5% of their brain or something. It's like, holy shit, that's a lot not being utilized, right? And as we're embodying more light or consciousness, awareness, expanding our consciousness, we're using more and more and more of our brain. Dormant parts of the body are lighting up. The light body comes on. A metaphor I used to share with my daughter when she was really little and in school, and we were talking about like social and emotional intelligence differences. Basically, you could say, unconscious humans or conscious. And I would tell her, well, when she was deciding about friends and where was it aligned and all of that, I would share this image of light bulbs. Some people's light bulb is off, and you can tell that light bulb is not on. It's kind of like the lights are on when no one's home kind of thing. You're not really sure how they're alive. And it's not like a judgment piece. You're just like, I don't understand how this person's like functioning. Like, then there's the light bulbs that flicker on and off. Zzz, they're not all the way on and they're not all the way off. And then you have lights that are brighter and they're on and they're more consistently on. And so I just like to use that as visual aids when you see the energy in people or how much light is coming out of their eyes, how present are they? How are they here now? Are they in another place? Like trying to just like break it down. Like these are entirely different dimensions of existing, entirely different access. Like it's so stark in contrast. So if you think about a light bulb that doesn't have a lot of wattage, it's a low wattage, it's flickering on and off, it's inconsistent. Well, that's a lower, I hate to say lower or higher, but we're just talking about like numbers to try to share this imagery here of like, being whole or being fragmented and how much of a light quotient and how that impacts. And how much shifts with that. And so like the most unconscious people, their energy is like a black hole. Like they want to suck from you, they feel good with you and your energy. They don't know how to do that for themselves yet. And they may not, they may never, they may be parasitic forever. That may be in this life, I should say, that may be how, their lesson or whatever, is to be like a parasite like that. But then others, so I just am trying to share, like, this is a completely different world, different concepts. There's narratives in the human world. There's a consensus reality that is a program. It is the matrix. When we talk about the 3D slave matrix, right? And it's important to know that the word matrix, all that means is an intersecting lattice of energetic lines, So you think about like crystals that do that or hash marks, it's an intersectionality of space, time, and frequency. So there are a bazillion matrices. We have a soul matrix, then you have the 3D human matrix that's been pre-created by something other than themselves, and they're not sovereign. So they are just operating within it kind of on autopilot in this amnesia, just going along, And some people that's their journey. But we feel to know. And there's the feel see, which is a whole body energy field, feeling the energy, reading the energy, not locked in a little cube here in the head, which is the whole thing. You look into the black box, the cube programs, you can look at that's all 4D stuff for us to unlock. But it's like a whole sensory holographic kind of way of functioning. And it becomes quite enjoyable because, you become free. And of course, there's always going to be more challenging levels, but you become free of material needs or conditions and can just take in the magnificence through your senses, of this interface of the physical body and the light body, like with the ambiance around you, and be completely in heaven, and just enamored and just feeling amazing, just taking it all in, your reality and everything here in it, versus the human consciousness that has to have things just so, has to have savings to feel comfortable. Like all these things get ripped away. And I would say the dehumanizing, we talked about this sometimes, which what I mean to say is the deprogramming of where we clung on to stuff to feel our value or our worth or happiness, or to even feel like we're getting results. That's still a big one for me, is like, where are my fucking results, you know? And just having to let go entirely and just like be here now. Again, be here now. Um, but I wanted to share that when you're living with humans and you're supposed to, and you're around other humans, could be a work situation or living, whatever, you start to see how differently we're functioning, where we're coming from, what a different world it is, and then how weird it feels after a while. We get used to perceiving instead of thinking, or like the heart is the true mind, if you want to say, or the full body reading and feeling the energy. And then you're with other humans, and they're all locked up in their brain, in their head. It's like, no, it has to be this way and this word. And it's like all about definitions. And it's very interesting because you can see the consciousness kind of just looping 90-degree angles, 90-degree angles, 90-degree angles, like in a cube in their head. It starts to get really fucking crazy. You're like, holy shit, I can't believe I used to operate like that. And it's wild. So it's not analytical anymore or linear anymore. It's like it's holographic. It's feeling all that is here now, to feel our way through things instead of analyzing it to death. So reading energy. And I think it can be really helpful to realize, okay, yeah, so we're functioning completely different, which is great. There's no judgment, it's just different. And we're around each other to learn and exchange and all that. And I actually have to be aware as the light leader, in this space, to communicate in a way, like we have to start to be really aware of words and how a word can be a file for another person, and they could take it completely the wrong way because they're not feeling into your energy. They're not feeling your heart speak. You're actually speaking from your heart. You're sharing, you're kind, you're open, maybe very direct, but their ego is just going to run with it. So they're not really receiving the information. They're not really hearing you. They're attaching a preconceived definition. So those are the really linear people. Yeah, so hopefully this can help a little bit, and I'll pass it to you, Annette, if there's stuff you want to, because this is a big piece of this, but that's what I really wanted to paint, was different functioning, and that we have to ensure as smooth as possible compassionate communication is working with language now, and we have to learn how to speak to them in a whole other way, because you can see where they're going to maybe misconstrue, if you will, and it starts to get really interesting just trying to fucking talk to people.
I will agree wholeheartedly with what you said. It's really, it's very challenging when you get plunked back in with people operating from a human consciousness, right? It doesn't mean they don't have other aspects. It doesn't mean we won't see those aspects throughout the day, but that's not their home for, they're the base aspects human. Things get rough, they're going human, and you just get ready for it. I used to really get into astrology for one of those reasons, because based on someone's sign, I knew when they were human what they were going to do. Every sign has their what's gonna happen when it gets rough, and they're gonna go one way or the other, right? So you just understand that. But when we do get in that environment, the key thing you just hit on was you see how different you are. And whether it's been a long time by yourself, whether you're in different, wherever you are in your process, your awakening, your ascension journey, wherever you are on it, you notice you're not that anymore. You don't function from that belief system. You don't function. You're not hooked up to that gridding anymore. Some people call it gridding, like the human earth gridding and the new earth gridding, or you're not hooked up to that. So, and it can be difficult for a while because you're still trying to value your success on a human belief system. You're still trying to value your videos on likes, or you're trying to value, your business on how much money did I make today. You're trying to value your business on, or your life on success that was dictated by a human belief system that is totally opposite from a soul belief system, right? So we can kind of go around and around in that for a long time because that's what we know. No matter when you start embodying your aspects and you're still used to that human system, that's a system you grew up in, whether it be for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, it doesn't matter. That's the one you grew up in. That your DNA is encoded with human DNA. Doesn't mean you don't have other DNA in there that you're unlocking as you go through. But there's still that human DNA that tells you that's a success, that's not a success. That was looked at in a human consciousness as success. That is not. I can remember talking to people and they would go into things that they did 30 years ago because in their mind, that was what was successful. Whether they played sports or they did this or they did that. 30 years ago, I did this. Not who they were today, but who they were then, because that's how they valued success. And a lot of times we get stripped of that because we have to understand that that is not how we're valued on our presence. But humans don't value that. So we have to find that value in ourselves. And for a long time, I do feel like humans are in our life and we might be living with humans surrounded by human consciousness because we have to learn that. We still have a match with these people because we still have the belief that that's how we value ourselves, right? And until we understand that, okay, maybe in this reality, I'm not bringing money to the reality, but I'm bringing my presence. I'm bringing some other service, whatever it is, whether you're cleaning the house, whether you're, one thing or the other. But because humans value money, that's what gets valued. And no matter what else you're doing, it's not going to be valued. So we don't value ourselves. And that's why we're there. We're there to learn. Our soul doesn't care about money. That doesn't mean you don't have money, because at some point you have to have money to wish on a society that has money. So this trips a lot of people up because they think, oh, I don't need it. No, you need money to buy things because that's still the society we're in. But we don't value ourselves on that. And we don't value ourselves or rate someone in the reality whether they show up with money or not. Do you show up with anything? Humans show up with nothing. Or they might throw some money on the table if it's convenient for them because they want something. There's always an agenda in a human consciousness. And sometimes for a while, it takes us a while for us not to have an agenda. And sometimes when I thought I was clean and didn't have one, I had one. If I dug deep enough, I could find my agenda and why I wanted something. So as we really start to look at why we're still in realities with human consciousness, is then we're not finding ourselves just with the highest consciousness people. And let's say you find those people and you all of a sudden are in groups that are, people are operating from a higher consciousness. Sometimes that can bother us because maybe they're unearthing something in us we don't want to see yet. So maybe we're still kind of going back to some of the human consciousness people because we feel like we're maybe a step above that, but maybe we're not wanting to hear what this other person has to say who's 3 steps above us, And I'm just saying steps is just a reference, it doesn't really matter. You're where you're supposed to be. Some people are not going to ascend in the human body they're in. That's just, they didn't agree to it. They're not going to. They'll come back in a different human body and ascend in that one. Not everyone's on the same journey we're on, and not everyone's going to be in the same belief system we're in. So when we're around people who have a different belief system, and it's the one we used to believe in, and now we just see it's all opposite, it's all backward, and it's funny because, as humans, we only get concerned when it affects us. We don't give a shit if it doesn't affect us. We can say someone's getting persecuted against. Well, as long as we're not getting persecuted against, we don't really even want to call it persecution. That's not persecution unless it's us. And then we're like, wait a minute. Yeah, that's persecution because I'm involved now. That is a very easy way to tell a human consciousness, because until it affects them, they don't care. You can have whatever's going on until it affects them. They don't care. And it's not so much they don't, because they don't feel the effects on them. And Marissa said it. It's right here. That's it. That's all they see. That consciousness only has the capability to see this much. It can't see anything else. So, when you start ascending and spreading out your consciousness, you start embodying different aspects that have more sight, you unlock different strands of your DNA, you feel everything. All of a sudden, you understand that everything affects you. Whereas humans, we don't think it affects us till it physically comes in our world. We don't see how it energetically affects us. Humans don't have that capability. We do. So we are affected in a way by everything, and we understand we're affected by everything. So everything is important in a sense in that case. And we don't wait for it to affect us physically because we know it's already affecting us energetically. Whereas humans, until it affects their world, they don't care. There was a book I read. I think it was. I can't remember it. I think Rudd was the person who read. It was about DNA. I don't know if you read it, Marissa, but it was a line in there. He went over all the different. I think it was DNA. It was definitely unlocking your DNA or something. I think Rudd was the author of the book, but there's a lot somewhere in there. He talked about the tornado in a human consciousness. I don't know if he said exactly like this. I'm going to paraphrase. The tornado didn't hit your house that year, so you're okay, right? You go and live your life for that year, and then maybe the tornado hit the neighbor's house. In other words, something happened to them. Someone got sick. Someone got this. Someone got fired from their job. Something happened to them that shook their world. A tornado hit them that year, but then you were fine that year. As a human consciousness, that's how we live. We go year to year waiting for the tornado to hit. Eventually it will. Hurricane will hit, the tornado will hit our house at some point, right? I mean, because we don't clear anything. That's one reason we don't get money. We don't get money because if we had money, we'd buy our way out of everything. How many things would you not have done if you had the money to get someone else to do it? Or not deal with something because you don't want to deal with it? If I have money, I would not have done this reality, right? Because to us, the quickest way through it is through it. We understand that, yeah, I might not be a comfortable reality for my human, but I've got to go through it. Whereas a human would avoid it and wouldn't go through it. It might be the difference between going home and visiting your blood family every Christmas for, 2 days. And it might take you 2-3 decades to get to a point where you feel like you've cleared some of the programming you had regarding your family. Whereas, maybe in our ascended reality, we have to go back and live with them. And now we're faced with it every day. So we're going to work through that in 2 years and not 3 decades. Because our human would have avoided it for 3 decades, but our soul won't. Our human's going to procrastinate. Our soul won't. Our soul might say, you don't like it, but this really is the quickest way to get you to the next reality because you've got to clear all this stuff. And these are the only people that can help you clear it. You don't like it. Your human doesn't like it, but this is the quickest one. So this is the one you got to do. Even if it's not the one we want, our human wants a different one. But this is the quickest way to get there, even if we can't see that at the time, because it's uncomfortable. Our human avoids uncomfortable. They will dip and duck every time. And that's what our human's going to do. So if we're avoiding it, we're procrastinating it, that's our human. We can say we don't have, we all have it still. But how much is it? How much do we hear it? How much is the voice? How much is it dictating our day to day? So I'm going to kick it back to you, Marissa, to go with that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I love that. And I appreciate the reflection that when we have to go home, it's an accelerated, that's great. And it is a gift. It definitely is a gift if I feel into what that's doing across like the lineages, and the DNA. Pretty amazing stuff. So thank you, Annette, so much for all of that. I wanted to share a little bit more about, I kind of covered it about translating. So one of the things that at first it irritated me so much because it felt kind of like enabling or babying. I had a lot of ways to judge this. But when we talk about communicating with anybody, with humans, anybody at a different level of consciousness, you can tell right away where they are by the words they're using, tone of voice, or timbre of their voice. And you'll get information in that moment because you're feeling you're in your oneness, which feels so trite to say, but you're unified, you're present, you're present is the best way to say it. You're present with this other person. And you start to get information kind of on where they are. And it's a very interesting process because they're speaking from their head and we have to be so cognizant, or that's a play on words, but so present so as not to get sucked into that because we functioned a lot there, right? So at first it can be easy, to slip back into getting caught in your head, and then it's the two heads talking, and it's a funny image. So we have to be in our heart space, and there's a heart speak. It's a different frequency. So we're coming from that, asking, basically receiving the words to speak. So speaking is different. There's a presence here that we integrate so that we can communicate, and ideally, unless it's supposed to happen, it's gonna happen. So you can't prevent this. Trigger the fuck out of somebody. You could say, "Oh, hi, how are you?" and smile, and they may not feel good about themselves, and just even your energy or your smile, can set them off. It depends. So there's only a certain amount of preparedness that one can bring to the table, and you just understand that, oh, that was supposed to happen. There's a recipe going on, there's an alchemy, a chemistry going on, and it might flow and be really great, and we can co-create something, or at least have a pleasant exchange and then move on, or not. And so I want to share again, like, how words are files in each person. They're referencing humans, they're referencing their experiences. Think about the education system and all of the different, like, for lack of better phrasing, like the narratives, the consensus reality, the brainwashing. For instance, they've done such a good job of twisting people away. Like, I love language. I love language. I love studying the root languages and how they're all connected to light language. When we get down to the bottom of that language tree, it's all Sanskrit and Hebrew and it's beautiful, and Aramaic, all light languages, and then somehow, turned into all the languages that we have here on planet Earth right now. But what's really interesting with that is when you're speaking from the heart versus the head, there's a different frequency, and they may not even be able to translate what you're saying literally, linearly, like the brain can't get it. It's short circuiting. But so they can't actually understand what you're saying, but they can feel you. And that's a different one. And that's where you can ask for these, I call them, you can activate your conscious, compassionate communicator energy crystals in your throat. And this is where we're speaking from a different place, right? So we're in our heart and a unified body as an energy. We're bringing the energy here. So it's not a linear construct. And you actually have a natural translator that starts to happen, where you know how to speak to people wherever they are. So you're constantly translating your energy in words that can support them, can assist them. Because one thing you become super cognizant of is you say the wrong thing, and then someone can shut down. Their heart, then they really shut down. They're just starting to open up, and then, ooh, they sphincter up so fast because it's safer there. And so we want to assist and support, and it's just, yeah, it's just a very interesting process. So I like to bring in those visuals of, like, the space person visiting, and learning how to Google Translate, except that before Google Translator, before the AI that we had with the crystalline light body, and this just connection, this interconnectedness. So we have to translate, and that's part of our service, I feel. And also being disconnected or detached from how it's going to be received as well. So we do our best to bring it with love, but you can't control the way it's received. That's on the other person. So it gets so interesting. But those were pretty much the points that I had. Was everything we talked about today was just so phenomenal. Yeah, so thank you. And hopefully this was clear for everybody. It's not like an attack on a kind of consciousness. It's using words to differentiate and catch ourselves. Where are we? Oh, did I shrink down? Do I feel my love again? And it starts to get more simple, but then it gets hard because you get so expanded that it's almost like you can collapse in on yourself, and you're like in this black hole, integrating a new something. And it's important to know that your universe, your soul is going to put you in these situations, and it doesn't matter how long it's been or how sick you are of it. You're not done until you're done. And the other day I reached out to Annette because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like really in this, and I can't see again because I got so folded up in like, I call it, like, the pretzel brain. I got stuck in my head, pretzel brain knot, because you're at another level of clearing it, and you're like, oh my God. And you take it personal, like, am I failing? Like, why is this way? And I really appreciate, because Annette will share, very directly, when you're done, you're done. And you're like, okay, all right, then I'm just going to relax, as best as one can. So whatever situations you find yourself in, do your best to just be present, and know that you'll be done when you're done. And do your best to receive everything you can from the teaching of the moment. And then pull away when you need to, because that's so important too. Yeah, so I'll pass it back to you, Minette. And that's pretty much all I had today.
No, I think it's funny when you say when you're done, you're done. And realities close up very quickly once they're done. When our soul sees no purpose in them, they end. I've seen so many people, even operating from a human consciousness, saying, oh, I can't quit my job. I'd never be able to leave. These people would not let me go. And very dramatic and very how we were in our human consciousness. And I'm like, you'd be surprised how quickly you just go. It's how quick that happened. Like I'm so fat. I thought that would take a lot longer, to that reality to wrap up, but it didn't at all. It did really quickly. Um, because they do. When we're done, we're done. And when you're around when you're around people operating from a human consciousness, and that's their home frequency, and that's where they are energetically, they're still communicating with you energetically. Sometimes I remember when I would feel like I had to go out and meet a person. And I didn't know who it was. I just knew I had to be here. I had to go somewhere. I'm like, all right, let me get going. And I'd get there and I'd wait and no one would show up. No one would come sit next to me to start talking. And finally I would just be like, come on, man. Whoever you're supposed to be, come on. I'm going home in 20 minutes. And every time I would say that, so the person I was supposed to talk to would just show up, sit down and start talking. Because energetically they heard that. Like, oh yeah, I have to go do that. Just because someone's in a human consciousness doesn't mean they don't understand soul contracts. Well, let me put that back. They don't have them. They might not, they don't consciously understand them, but they still have them. And they still have to be at a certain place at a certain time. They still have to support someone financially. Maybe they don't want to, but they know they're supposed to. They still have to, provide, an apartment for someone that they didn't know they had. They still have things they have to do here. They just because someone's in a human consciousness doesn't mean they don't have a soul. They're just not acting from the soul in a sense. They have no free will. They're just doing what they agreed to come here and do, and then they're doing it the long way. A lot of times we go through some of these harsher experiences because that's how humans clear things. Humans, that's how we used to do it. We go through the experience. We beat our head against the wall because that was how we cleared it. We didn't understand. Don't create it in the first place. We didn't understand we can energetically clear some of these things. We can have a lighter experience because we're clearing it energetically. Just because someone is not fully conscious or even, I don't know if there is such a thing as fully conscious because we're always becoming more conscious, but it doesn't mean they don't have anything to offer. I think Marissa said it much better than I did at the beginning when she, I think, brought a little more compassion to the human consciousness than I do. She softens it quite a bit more than I do, because they still know what they're supposed to do. They still have their marching orders too, whether they're triggering you, whether they're providing you with a space. And sometimes they have to squeeze us out of a reality because we really don't want to leave. We say we want to leave, but do we really want to leave? Because it's not that bad, maybe. I mean, I thought it was bad. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. Maybe I don't really want to go because like I said, I think I said it earlier, everything looks better when it's walking away. When that reality is closing out, a lot of times we want to hang on to it because we don't want it to close out. We don't want to let it go, because most of these people won't come with you. They won't. And just because someone's human doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of other stuff going on energetically, and they get your message. They understand on an energetic level. They understand whether they understand your words or not. And I think Marissa's, when she said we have to pick them carefully because we don't want it. Unless you're going to stick around and help somebody work through a trigger, you don't want to trigger anybody because it's our responsibility to then sit there and sort that mess out. So we don't do that on purpose energetically. Something in your energy field can trigger someone else, but we don't intentionally try to trigger anybody because if you do, you're responsible. Now we sit here and we have to work through it with that person because we knew better in a sense, or we knew what we were doing. And let's put it like that. We consciously knew what we were doing. And if we decide to trigger someone, we know we're going to sit here and help them work through it. We're not just going to walk away. That's our responsibility because you are the highest consciousness in the room. And when you are, you're responsible. And we can put it on a human consciousness pissing us off. We can put it on this. That's just our human consciousness getting wrapped up in it. Because I know I've said this 100 times. Most of the time, our human is just unhappy because someone's not doing what we want them to do. That's it. That's what someone's not happy with you. And that's why you're not happy with somebody else. They're not doing what you want them to do. That's it. But even if it's us not doing what we want ourselves to do, that's normally what brings us unhappiness. We're not doing what we know we should be doing, and someone else isn't doing what we want them to do. And that's why we're butting heads. So once you continue to go, it gets easier to deal with human consciousness. And eventually, I do feel like you do start operating with people who that is not their go-to anymore. But when you are with people in human consciousness, and if you live with them full time and you're decided that that's what you're supposed to do, and you know that's what you're supposed to do, I think Marissa said it very well. You kind of pick your moments. You pick your moments. You say what feels right. And I'm gonna bring this up, and I don't know if Colette's on tonight, but Colette normally joins us. And Colette said this in one of the lives I did with her on Instagram, and she said, "Know when the moment is over." You can talk to someone when you know you have the door open. Know when it's past, and know, like when Marissa said, the door. It's like that when you're when Disney World, door closing, door closing. Step away from the door closing. Know when the moment is over, and I think that is another important thing to start to realize. Know when the door is open, and you can, people will call it. I'm gonna just drop a little put a little seed of consciousness in there for them to work through. Maybe bring up a soul contract and let them just mull the words. Let them maybe go home and look it up. Just let it kind of needle in there a little bit. Consciousness activates consciousness. You're activating other people. Just you sitting in the room activates other people. You don't have to say shit. Humans like to talk. That's just because they like to talk, because they don't consciously get everything going on underneath. Even when you're in your human consciousness, there's still shit going on underneath. You just can't see it. We can look at someone in a human consciousness creating a reality and see everything going on. It doesn't mean it's not going on. We just couldn't see it, and they can't see it because they don't have the consciousness to see it yet. It doesn't mean it's a different construction in a way of their reality. It's still constructing the same way. They just don't realize how they're contributing to that construction, right? So I'm going to kick it back to Marissa to sign off, but I did just want to say, know when the door's closed. And it doesn't mean it'll always be closed, but know when the moment is done, and you can feel it. You can feel, like, I can remember when I would go out and I would just talk to people for maybe a couple hours, and I knew I was supposed to come out and connect with the person, and then I would leave. I'd never see that person again. And I knew that. It was not going to be someone in my life forever, someone I was supposed to go to, talk to, and then leave. Whether it's because someone they know just died, it could have been 100 different, it was always 100 different things. I couldn't remember all of them. They would just sit there, start talking to me, and then I would know that was the person, and let's go. But I also remember you could feel when it was over, and when it was done, and you get tired, or you can just feel the energy shift, and you can feel that subtle shift. And I can remember one of the person saying, "Well, hey, do you want to hang out sometime?" And I'm like, "Oh, we just did that." We just hung out. We don't need to do that again. We just did that. That's what this was. Now I'm gonna go because we just did it. But that's more human consciousness. Like, oh, well, let's do this and call it. No, we already did that. We're over now. We're closing a reality out and I'm leaving. That's what we just did. So as we come to the end of our hangout, Marissa, I'm gonna kick it back to you because that's what this just was. And I'm gonna let you. I think that's everything I had. It's funny because when you're talking, it always brings up other things. Yeah, I think that's, I think that's good. So, all right, I'll kick it back to you to give us our closeout.
Thank you for so many valuable points. One thing I want to expand, I love that you shared, was the energy. Even if they're not consciously aware, they're still receiving the information. They're still reading the vibes, even if it's their subconscious, that's reading, the nervous system's reading the vibes. And that is such an important thing to remember, because sometimes, depending on what's going on, or family history, or whatever the intricacies of the, what used to maybe be an entanglement or a history or whatever with another, perhaps you can't communicate right now. You can't come to resolution right now. The disparity is too much. Well, the nice thing is that you're in your highest place, your soul, and you can just talk to their higher self, so to say, intending that from there. Soul to soul, I'm going to talk to you. And you can't talk to their face because they're only in their ego. They won't be able to listen. They're just going to want to be defensive or argue, whatever, just wasting energy that you're like, I'm not going to argue, but just wanting to assist and just let the person know, I love you. It's all going to be okay. All kinds of stuff like that. You can just make this a beautiful, intentional process of reaching out and connecting soul to soul, higher self to higher self.
I want to add this because what you just said brought this up. I think it was Robert Moss. He writes dream books that I read. I think it was one of the classes I took from him years ago, where it might not have been him. I think it was him. I could be wrong. Where he would say, pretend like you're throwing a ball to someone and you're energetically, you're throwing a ball. You might do it right before you go to sleep. You pick the person, you throw the ball. See what they do with the ball. Do they drop the ball? Do they not? Do they turn around? They don't want to, what are they doing with it? And then keep tossing it back and forth until you can get them to their energetic consciousness to throw it back to you. And can you get a smooth play of the ball? Sometimes it's a good way to picture it, and anytime I would try to, one thing I would worm into people was telepathy because it was a fun human thing and people loved it. But I always say, don't pick someone you got a problem with and has a problem with you, because they'll get the message, but they have a human conscious reason not to contact you. So you kind of skew the experiment in a sense. Don't pick someone who might have that issue with you or you have that issue with, but if you do want to talk to them, try the ball. Just think about throwing it back and forth. That was a really good one for me. I did that for a long time, and just to throw this kind of in at the end, I'll kick it back to you, Marissa, again. But, sometimes we just have to send out the call for others. We have to say, hey, can you send me someone else, that wants to do something, or it's in their higher aspects, and send that call out and see who you get. I know I was doing that. And then all of a sudden I remember a couple, maybe like a week passed. And then I felt like, you need to contact Marissa. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about contacting Marissa. I'm going to contact Marissa. But I had said that, we kind of, some people call it the clarion call. I've heard it called that. You just send out the energetic call. You can do it right before you go to sleep. Bring me these people. Bring me now, don't be surprised that people in your reality, show up in that regard, and you would never have thought of them in that regard. Like if I have a contract, show me the people I got contracts with I need to finish out. I've done that one. See who shows up, and you might be shocked who walks back in your door, and shocked at who is open to what you have to say. It could be someone you had no real connection with in the human experience, but now it is, right? So I'm going to let you finish it, but those are just some things that came to mind that I think will bring your point, kind of go with your point.
Well, and the really nice thing was I was absolutely and still am just purely delighted to hear from Annette because she was answering my call. So we were answering each other's call because I was saying, universe, I want people to collaborate with. I love having conscious discussions. Like, where's someone that would want to go deep and really get into this and have fun? And then I heard from her, and it just has been so exciting. So that's always a nice, heartwarming way to end the conversation is keep putting out the calls and also listen and see what happens. And it starts to get so fun, and that's part of the difference of being in a more open heart and expanded consciousness is starting to trust and have more playful curiosity, coming back into that kind of innocence, that playfulness, versus the rules or the fear holding us back, staying small, if you will, right? Which would be the human consciousness or the lower consciousness. I don't like to say lower at all, but just less awareness or less trust or love for one's self. So I hope that this has been supportive for everyone out there. It's been interesting again to see across social media, there's divides of all of this, like, well, I want to be human, and and people have different definitions of that. So again, here's the word game. Well, what do you mean by that? Let's break it down. So I feel good about how we have like opened this to put it out into the world at this time because it is a hot topic. So thank you so much, Annette. Thank you for this topic. It was brilliant timing. And thank you to everyone who joins us, and I hope you enjoy also on the replay. And you're always welcome to put questions down below. And just enjoy your journey and enjoy your process. And we'll see you all soon. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Annette.